What's going on, noobs? I am Rory, the Perpetual Noob, and welcome back to another exciting Hollow Knight boss discussion. This is the 26th video in a series where I'll be discussing each boss of Hollow Knight, where we can find them, how we can defeat them, and how does this boss fit into the world of Hollow Knight. Today we'll be talking about one of the legendary great knights of Hallownest, the jovial and exuberant White Defender. White Defender was added as part of the Hidden Dreams expansion, and is a dream boss located where we can find Dung Defender sleeping, in his warren to the right of the Royal Waterways. To access this fight, we need to do a couple of things. For starters, we've got to defeat White Defender's current real-world form, Dung Defender. We must defeat all three Dreamers. We must also acquire the spell Desolate Dive, which we need to bust through the floor just under the pump at the right of the Royal Waterways. We'll find Dung Defender sleeping soundly, and when we hit him with our dream nail, we'll be transported into his dream of the Pale Court of Hallownest from long ago. There are a few special notes about White Defender. The biggest is that there are 5 versions of this fight. Henceforth, I shall refer to these as Defender 1 through 5. There is a set progression, so we won't fight Defender 5 until we beat Defender 4, and so on. Each version of White Defender only does more damage to us. He has the same health and same attacks in every version. This is a dream boss fight, so we don't die when we lose, and any fragile charms we have equipped won't break. White Defender slams his arm into the ground, causing large spikes of dung to jut up. 3 spikes will form in rapid succession on each side of White Defender. The spikes reach high into the air, preventing any jumping over them. White Defender telegraphs this attack when he stands in place and raises an arm. Then he slams his fist into the ground. From that impact point, the spikes erupt. We'll hear him say, as he does this attack. Let's call this attack the Spike Slam attack. White Defender will gather up and throw 2 dung balls, one after the other. The balls will bounce around the arena randomly in large arcs, reaching to the top of the arena. Each ball will persist for about 4.5 seconds, but can be broken if we deal enough damage to them. These dung balls will continue to bounce even if they hit us, and White Defender will perform other attacks while the dung balls are bouncing. White Defender telegraphs this attack when he uses his hands to quickly gather up dung into a ball, and then throw the ball into the air. He performs these actions twice with a short pause in between each toss. Let's call this attack the Dung Toss attack. White Defender will dive in and out of the ground to move around the arena. He will dive in once and re-emerge somewhere else in the arena shortly after, covering about 25% of the arena. He moves left or right independent of where we are. White Defender telegraphs this attack when he crouches down and clasps his hands together in front of him, and then does a short leap forward and extends his claws ahead. Let's call this attack the Dive attack. White Defender will dive underground, and after a bit of time, burst into the air, raining dung balls everywhere. When he bursts from the ground, 10 dung balls join him, 5 on each side, and fall away from him in a tall arc. These dung balls do not bounce around. Instead, they break once they hit a wall, the floor. White Defender can burst up anywhere in the arena, and he will travel underground for about 1.5 seconds before he finds his burst point. White Defender telegraphs this attack, just like a dive attack, and instead of popping up randomly somewhere else in the arena quickly, White Defender disturbs the ground as he digs around in there for the next 1.5 seconds. Then the mound of dirt, sure, we'll keep calling it that, stops. In less than half a second after stopping, White Defender will burst out of the ground. Let's call this attack the Ground Burst attack. White Defender will gather up and throw 3 dung balls, one after the other. After the 3rd dung ball, White Defender himself will leap into the air and curl into a ball to join in the bouncing. Once he's had enough fun as a ball, he then slams into the ground, sending spikes across the arena in both directions. The slam doesn't target us. The spikes form in sets of 2, one on each side, and disappear just after the next set of spikes spring up. White Defender will remain underground until all of the spikes are gone. Once all of the spikes are gone, he will re-emerge with a Ground Burst attack, which signals the end of this entire attack. The dung balls and White Defender bounce around the arena just like a dung toss attack. Each ball will persist for about 4.5 seconds, but can be broken if we deal enough damage to them. White Defender will persist in his ball form for a variable amount of time, though no longer than 3.5 seconds, and we can still hurt him while he bounces around. If we hit him while he's a ball, we'll knock him off his current trajectory, keeping us safe. After he's done bouncing around, he slams into the ground and the erupting spikes quickly follow. The spikes are short enough that we can double jump over them. White Defender telegraphs this attack like he does for a dung toss attack, but instead of doing these actions twice, he performs them 3 times. After the third ball is tossed, White Defender pauses for a moment, like he does in between tosses. Then he just barely crouches before launching himself into the air in an arc. As he approaches the apex of the arc, he curls up into a perfect sphere. Fast forward no more than 3.5 seconds, and White Defender uncurls and slows to a stop in mid-air. Once uncurled, he raises both hands above his head before clasping them together and turning over into a diving position. This uncurling to diving position takes less than half a second. White Defender begins his rapid descent straight down. About 1/4 of a second after he slams into the ground, the first set of spikes appear. Then, as soon as all of the spikes are gone, the ground burst attack happens. Let's call this whole process the Defender Jubilee attack. Not exactly an attack, but once per fight, once we've dealt enough damage to him, White Defender will stop and shout like he does at the beginning of each fight. This means he's going into hyper mode. For the next 11-ish seconds, White Defender will string together 6 ground burst attacks, each happening a little over 1.5 seconds after the previous. Once hyper mode is over, White Defender returns to his regularly scheduled attack patterns. Fighting White Defender is completely optional, and just like Grey Prince Zote, does not count towards completion, but there is an achievement for defeating Defender 1. If I wasn't making this video, I would have stopped fighting at White Defender 4. I spent hours on that version of him because I hadn't yet figured out how to fight White Defender, so I took a long break from fighting this boss. Just like Grey Prince Zote, I believed that these later White Defender versions, 3 through 5, involve a lot of artificial difficulty, and, just like Grey Prince Zote, I've realized that this is because the bosses of the Hidden Dreams expansion are meant to be a challenge to any and all who wish to test their Hollow Knight combat prowess. Here's how this works. White Defender is tied for having the second most health of any individual boss in all of Hollow Knight, at 1600, and this is his starting health for every version of his fight. He also has every attack from the very beginning. The only thing that changes from Defender 1 all the way to 5 is how much damage he deals to us. It is directly related, so Defender 1 deals 1 damage, and Defender 5 deals 5, with appropriately scaling damage values for Defenders 2 through 4. Like I mentioned earlier, I struggled immensely with Defender 4. So much so that I stopped fighting White Defender until I could no longer avoid him, which was to get this video together. Yet, I got through Defenders 1 through 3 in 15 minutes. Why did I struggle so hard to go from a 3 damage fight to a 4 damage fight when there are no other changes between the two? In Defenders 1 through 3, I was fighting like I tended to with every boss, not worrying about getting hit because I knew I'd just heal at some point later. This tactic worked thanks to quick focus and exploiting the safe corners of the arena. I was so focused on being able to heal and keep my health topped off. I wasn't even thinking about learning White Defender's attacks or patterns. I just wanted to smash my nail into his face as much as possible and run away and heal when I needed to. In a single soul gauge, with quick focus, we can heal 3 hit points in 1.5 seconds. This was quick enough for Defenders 1 through 3. But once I got to Defender 4 and was taking 4 damage per hit, it was too much damage to recover from because once we drain our soul gauge, it takes a couple precious moments to refill from one of our reserve gauges, and in those precious moments, I'd have to move from my safe spot. And since I still wasn't focused on learning the fight, I would inevitably get hit again. So I'd fight scared, sticking only to the corners to try and avoid as much of what White Defender did with minimal risk to myself. This strategy didn't work, and Defender 4 was an incredibly frustrating experience. I had the strongest nail, Every empowered spell, every movement ability, maximum health, maximum soul vessels, maximum charm notches, and nearly every charm, and I just couldn't figure him out. I thought I had tried everything, and I was mad at the boss and thinking the game was cheap and that the boss design was terrible. Then I came back, months later, and I spent a few fights just learning, getting a feel for each attack and noticing patterns. I watched some of my Defenders 1 through 3 footage and looked at each attack frame by frame. From these activities, I pieced together how the fight works. Nearly everything White Defender does is random, and finding that out was like an epiphany. Now, I don't mean random as in there's no pattern to what he's doing, because every attack looks the same every time. But I mean random in that White Defender seems to hardly care about our presence at all. He dives towards us or away from us. He bursts from the ground wherever. He stops whenever he feels he's done bouncing, whether or not we're anywhere near him. The only time White Defender will be predictable is if we are standing too close to him after an attack. Then we can expect a spike slam, but sometimes he still won't do that. Once I learned this, Defenders 4 and 5 were no longer scary. It's a bit odd that figuring out something is almost completely random is what brought me peace and the confidence to defeat this boss. Once I had learned his attacks and his patterns and had my spiritual awakening, I defeated Defender 4 within 4 minutes and Defender 5 within 12. Now, obviously, just standing in place throughout the whole fight didn't work, so what are the real, tangible tactics I learned that helped me get through this great knight's demanding trials? Staying grounded. There are times when being airborne can work, but overall that was too dangerous. A lot of White Defender's attacks cover a lot of the airspace in the arena, so it was best for me to stay on the ground as much as possible. Staying on the ground meant needing the Shade Cloak. We can find the Shade Cloak at the bottom right of the Abyss. I tended to use it only to dash through a dive attack, or the spikes from a Spike Slam or Defender Jubilee. Thanks to White Defender's attack patterns, I almost always had a Shadow Dash ready when I needed it. Watching the ground. This was very important during Hyper Mode and all ground bursts. We can see where White Defender is going when traveling underground, but he pops out of the ground wicked quick, so it's important to keep an eye on the ground during those moments. Protecting my head. The Dung Toss, Defender Jubilee, and Ground Burst attacks are notoriously dangerous for our head, so whenever those attacks were happening, my primary focus turned skyward, always ready with an upward slash or an emergency Shadow Dash. Watching the ground and protecting my head can become tricky when White Defender decides to prep for a Ground Burst attack while Dung Balls are still bouncing around. Spacing. There are plenty of safe spots during this fight. Yes, these safe spots are almost always moving, but there are a lot of them. There are large enough gaps between Dung Balls during a Ground Burst attack, there's tons of space in between Dung Balls during the Dung Toss and Defender Jubilee attacks, and his Spike Slam has a very limited range. I tended to get hit the most by getting too close to White Defender during the Dung Toss attack, because that was when I tended to use Nail Strikes to damage him. The range on those Dung Balls as he tosses them is pretty long, so I needed to always be aware of my spacing. This was also key when protecting my head and watching the ground. And patience. There's actually a fair amount of time in between White Defender's attacks, and I found it was important to only move when I needed to. There was no reason to run around in a frenzy. There was no reason to dash after White Defender, because then I might use my necessary Shadow Dash. In fact, doing so generally meant I was going to be hit even more, so I would wait to make my necessary moves. Spells are very useful. Descending Dark is always useful for its damage and invincibility, but it's not nearly as useful as it is against Dung Defender, since it no longer knocks White Defender out of the ground. I found Shade Soul to be pretty helpful. A well-timed spellcast can damage White Defender and instantly destroy a Dung Ball just before he tosses it. Crazy enough, the spell I used the most was Abyss Shriek. I found in test runs that Abyss Shriek was a great way to do tons of damage to White Defender after he popped out of the ground, and I found that he did that a lot. So I let him have it by getting close to where he would pop out, and as he returned to the ground, I'd cast Abyss Shriek, dealing massive damage. My charms for my first victory against Defender 5 were Unbreakable Heart, Shaman Stone, Mark of Pride, and Quick Slash. This setup does require all 11 charm notches. Plain and simple, I wanted more survivability against Defender 5. And sure, having 9 hit points meant I could survive 1 hit, but I wanted to be able to survive more. And Unbreakable Heart gave me 2 more hit points for 2 charm notches, which meant I could survive 2 hits. And that apparently was the magic number of hits for victory. Thanks to my test runs when I was trying all sorts of tactics and charm combinations, I learned how useful spells were. Incorporating spells is kind of a newer tactic of mine, and I'm getting more comfortable with it. I knew I wouldn't be using spells in rapid succession, so I decided to simply amplify my spell's damage using Shaman Stone. I brought Mark of Pride because that charm gave my nail enough range to keep me safe when White Defender was making dung balls. With Mark of Pride, I don't need to hit and run in between dung ball formations, which is great because that is a way I get hit a lot against both White and Dung Defender. Quick Slash was brought along because I wanted to have the quicker nail swing recovery to better avoid any attacks that might quickly follow a dung toss attack. I also wanted to be able to dish out as many nail strikes as possible while White Defender was starting a dung toss or Defender Jubilee attack. I'm going to be talking about other tactics that could work for Defender 5, because anything that works for that fight will work in earlier versions. I mentioned the usefulness of spells earlier, and aside from amplifying their damage with Shaman Stone, if you'd like to be able to cast them for less soul, equip the charm Spell Twister. Similarly, equipping the charm Fluke Nest will improve the damage of our Vengeful Spirit or Shade Soul spell, and is useful because White Defender will stand in place many times throughout the fight, allowing us to hit him with the entirety of that spell. Healing can be done. If you want to heal without any charms, the corners are the safest spots, as the dung balls tend to not hit those spots. But there are other options that make healing much safer and more possible. Quick Focus, of course, is always helpful. Combining that with Deep Focus does mean that in a single soul gauge we could heal 6 hit points. However, we are still limited because we can't move while we're healing, so I recommend adding Shape of Un as well. Now, we don't need all 3 charms for maximum efficacy, but I would recommend keeping the combination of Quick Focus and Shape of Un, because that combination allows us to avoid dung balls while healing. The suite of health boosting charms is always an option to give us the opportunity to survive more hits. If you want to take this route, use Fragile/Unbreakable Heart, Lifeblood Core, and Joni's Blessing. If we start with 9 regular hit points and use all of these charms, we'll have 22 hit points. Let's talk about some other ways to maximize our nail's potential. Rubberfly's Elegy is also useful because the nail beams can deflect dung balls, and the range of those beams is much longer than even Long Nail and Mark of Pride combined. While we gain in range, we lose in damage, as the beams only do half of the damage of our nail. The increased range can keep us very safe from nearly every attack. The biggest trick with Rubberfly's Elegy is maintaining full health. To maximize our damage in general, we can add Fragile/Unbreakable Strength and Quick Slash. A couple other charms and tactics I wanted to note. Sprint Master certainly helps us get around the arena without needing to worry about dashing. Dream Shield can be a great umbrella. We can score some good nail damage using the Nail Art Cyclone Slash when White Defender is performing a dung toss or beginning a Defender Jubilee attack. And if we're using a nail art, the charm Nail Master's Glory is always helpful. No matter the strategy you choose, I do believe that having the strongest nail, the Pure Nail, is incredibly helpful, so I recommend upgrading your nail at the nailsmith who resides at the bottom left of the City of Tears. I also recommend collecting every Mask Shard, Soul Vessel Fragment, and Charm Notch. It doesn't hurt to have access to every charm either. Please see my Soul Master video for a general description about playstyles, and please see the link in the description for a great video about charm combinations. For sanity's sake, White Defender is the memory/dream incarnation of Dung Defender. White Defender is what Dung Defender was back when the Pale King was still around. Dung Defender's real name is Ogrim. I just wanted to get that straight because I am going to be using all 3 names throughout this portion of the video. Each time we defeat White Defender, we see him on one knee, looking down. He lifts his head and reaches out to the white shadows in the back of the arena. Then the shadows fade away. Once the shadows are gone, White Defender hangs his head. And once the screen fades to white, we get a statement or two from Ogrim. When we awaken after defeating Defender 5, we find Ogrim watching us. He has no idea that we've been bashing him about in his dreams, and is jovial as ever, even offering us a place within his small home to stay. Despite his outward expression, his mind is on other things. Ogrim waxes poetic about the Pale Court, the Pale King, and his fellow great knights. And ever the good sport, he tells us that he could imagine us standing there with all of them. The happy memories continue even into the Hunter's Journal entry for White Defender. The shadows we see in the arena are the 4 other great knights of Hallownest: Zimmer, Drya, Yzma, and Hedgemole, and in the center is the Pale King. If we have the opportunity to dream nail White Defender while fighting him, we learn even more about Ogrim's memories of his friends. There is no doubt that Ogrim is one of the most upbeat characters in all of Hollow Knight, but like every single character in Hollow Knight, he has experienced great tragedy that haunts him to this day. For him, being one of the 5 great knights of Hallownest was the highest honor, and one that he took very seriously. The scene that plays out at the end of each White Defender fight demonstrates a couple things. One, that Ogrim misses the Pale King and the other knights terribly, especially Yzma. And 2, he carries with him so much shame and regret. If we speak with Ogrim after defeating him as Dung Defender, we learn that he likes to fight with honor and thinks we are an honorable opponent. That he was once a great knight and he was proud to be one. We learn that he regrets being unable to protect Hallownest from a formless enemy, and that he regrets not spending more time with Yzma, a knight he clearly respects, admires, and, let's face it, loves. And that he knew the Hollow Knight and recognizes us to be another like them. It isn't until we hear his dialogue after each White Defender defeat that we get to see just how eager Ogrim truly was. He believed with all his heart that he could live up to what he thought was expected of him as a great knight of Hallownest. Unfortunately, the infection was just too much for him and the other great knights, and that defeat, that inability to be the protector of Hallownest he swore to be, hit Ogrim hard. Eventually, he wound up in the dung pits of the royal waterways to protect his dear Yzma and her grove from those who would try to intrude. From his perspective, he found a way to still be a great knight. Yzma's grove was the only thing he thought he could protect anymore, even after Yzma was gone. It was now a matter of honor, which also kept him from seeing her. From his White Defender dialogue, we can see that Ogrim still regrets how events played out. The fact that most, if not all, of the great knights and the Pale King are dead and gone, and that even before then, they had grown apart. Ogrim clearly wishes things were as they had been when he was a member of the Pale Court, and it seems that he blames himself for a lot of the problems that they all experienced. I wonder how much of his upbeat attitude is genuine versus how much is all a mask to hide his pain. Given Hollow Knight's obsession about masks and hidden secrets, I'm led to believe that Ogrim once was genuinely happy and upbeat about everything. But with all of those whom he cared about being gone, and him feeling powerless to stop that, or stop anything that's happened to Hallownest recently, it's now just a facade. Ogrim truly meant what he said about us, that he believes us to be worthy of the title Great Knight of Hallownest. So much so that when we return to his warren after defeating Defender 5 and resting on a bench, we find him gone. But he made a statue of us to stand with the statues of his long-lost friends before he left. No one knows where Ogrim is. That's it for our boss discussion about White Defender. Thank you for joining me today, noobs. Stay tuned for future Hollow Knight boss videos. If you have any thoughts about White Defender, either about the fight or about him/Ogrim as a part of the world of Hollow Knight, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. I am the Perpetual Noob, and I'll see you all next time.